In 2022, 73 law enforcement officers were arrested for murder or manslaughter in the United States. But the case of Jova'a Jackson stands out as a chilling reminder of how quickly a protector can become a perpetrator. Over the course of just 48 hours, this decorated deputy went from upholding the law to breaking it in the most profound way possible, killing the father of her unborn child. The question is, what pushed her over the edge? Jova'a Jackson stood at the precipice of two worlds, her badge gleaming in one hand, her heart pulled inexorably in another direction. The weight of her duty pressed down upon her shoulders, a constant reminder of the oath she had sworn to uphold. Yet, beneath the surface of her composed exterior, a storm was brewing, threatening to tear apart everything she had worked so hard to build. Her rise through the ranks of the Rockdale County Sheriff's Office had been nothing short of meteoric. From her humble beginnings as a detention deputy, Jova'a had climbed the ladder with a determination that impressed even the most seasoned veterans. Her dedication was unwavering, her commitment to justice absolute. With each passing year, her reputation grew, accolades piling up like leaves in autumn. To her colleagues, she was the epitome of what a law enforcement officer should be: principled, fearless, and utterly devoted to her calling. But beneath the polished exterior of her uniform, a war raged within Jova'a's heart. The lines between her personal life and her sworn duty began to blur, creating a maelstrom of conflicting emotions that threatened to consume her. It was in this tumultuous state that Terrell Douglas entered her life, like a bolt of lightning splitting the night sky. Their meeting was innocuous at first, a chance encounter that should have been forgotten in the whirlwind of her daily duties. But something about Terrell's smile, the warmth in his eyes, sparked a flame within Jova'a that she couldn't extinguish. Little did she know that this spark would ignite a fire that would eventually consume her entire world. As the days passed, the weight of her choices grew heavier. Each stolen moment with Terrell felt like a betrayal of her badge, yet she found herself powerless to resist the pull of her heart. The internal conflict raged, a battle between duty and desire that left her sleepless at night, questioning everything she thought she knew about herself. The first warning signs appeared like cracks in a dam, raised eyebrows from colleagues when Terrell's name was mentioned, whispered concerns in the break room that fell silent as she approached. Jova'a chose to ignore these red flags, convincing herself that her personal life had no bearing on her ability to serve and protect. But deep down, she knew the truth was far more complicated. With each passing day, the line between her professional integrity and personal desires eroded a little more. What started as harmless flirtation evolved into clandestine meetings, stolen kisses in the shadows of the very community she had sworn to safeguard. The thrill of their forbidden romance was intoxicating, clouding her judgment and leading her down a path she never imagined she'd tread. As weeks turned into months, Jova'a found herself standing at a crossroads she never thought she'd face. On one side lay her duty, her badge, and the respect of her peers. On the other, the promise of a love that made her feel alive in ways she had never experienced before. The choice before her seemed impossible, a Gordian knot with no clear solution. The true cost of love, when duty and desire collide in the world of law enforcement, is far greater than Jova'a could have ever imagined. As she stood on the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of her life forever, the weight of her badge seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. Little did she know that the choice she was about to make would set in motion a chain of events that would not only destroy her career but ultimately lead her down a path of no return. In the world of law enforcement, there are lines that should never be crossed. But what happens when the very person sworn to uphold the law finds herself irresistibly drawn to someone on the wrong side of it? Jova'a was about to learn that Terrell Douglas's charm masked a history far darker than she could have imagined. The allure of Terrell Douglas was undeniable. His smile could light up a room, and his charisma drew people in like moths to a flame. But beneath the surface of his magnetic personality lay a past written in the cold, unforgiving pages of police reports and court documents. Each file told a story of a man who had danced with the law and repeatedly come out on the losing side. As Jova'a delved deeper into Terrell's criminal record, a pattern emerged that should have set off alarm bells in her mind. The charges ranged from petty theft to more serious offenses, painting a picture of a man who seemed to view the law as a mere suggestion rather than a binding social contract. Yet, despite the glaring red flags, Jova'a found herself drawn ever closer to him, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The contradiction between her sworn duty and her growing feelings for Terrell gnawed at Jova'a's conscience. By day, she donned her uniform, a symbol of justice and order. But as night fell, she found herself in the arms of a man who represented everything she had sworn to stand against. The weight of her badge grew heavier with each stolen moment, a constant reminder of the oath she was betraying. As whispers of their relationship began to circulate through the community, the trust that had taken years to build started to crumble. Neighbors who once greeted Jova'a with warm smiles now regarded her with suspicion, their eyes filled with questions they dared not ask aloud. The very people she had sworn to protect now wondered if she was truly worthy of that responsibility. Within the walls of the sheriff's office, the pressure mounted. Jova'a could feel the weight of her colleagues' stares, could hear the hushed conversations that fell silent as she approached. The pristine career she had built with such dedication was beginning to show its first cracks, hairline fractures that threatened to shatter everything she had worked for. In the quiet moments when she was alone with her thoughts, Jova'a grappled with the man she knew Terrell to be and the person his past painted him as. She saw kindness in his eyes, felt gentleness in his touch. How could this be the same man whose name was etched in black and white on those damning reports? The internal struggle tore at her, leaving her sleepless and conflicted. The psychological toll of loving someone society deemed unworthy was immense. Jova'a found herself constantly looking over her shoulder, fearful of discovery and judgment. Each ring of her phone sent a jolt of panic through her body. Was this the call that would expose everything? The stress of living a double life began to wear on her, etching lines of worry on her once confident face. As the days passed, Jova'a found herself standing at a crossroads. On one side lay her duty, her badge, and the respect of her community. On the other, a man who made her feel alive in ways she had never experienced before. The choice before her seemed impossible, a Gordian knot with no clear solution. The complexities of rehabilitation and second chances took on new meaning when viewed through the lens of a law enforcement officer in love. Jova'a had always believed in the power of redemption, had seen firsthand how lives could be turned around. But now, as she stood on the precipice of a decision that would alter the course of her life forever, she wondered if love truly could conquer all, or if some paths were simply too dark to overcome. They say love conquers all, but what happens when it conquers your very identity? For Jova'a Jackson, the answer to that question would come at a devastating cost. As her carefully constructed life began to unravel, she would face a choice that no amount of police training could have prepared her for. The day Jova'a's superiors called her into the office, the air was thick with tension and unspoken accusations. The disappointment in their eyes cut deeper than any reprimand ever could. As they laid out the evidence of her relationship with Terrell Douglas, each word felt like a nail in the coffin of her career. The very foundations of her world began to crumble beneath her feet. What followed was a grueling internal investigation that stripped away every layer of privacy Jova'a had so carefully maintained. Each question felt like a scalpel, peeling back the protective armor she had built around her heart, exposing vulnerabilities she had desperately tried to conceal. With every answer, she felt herself shrinking, her once proud stance giving way to the weight of her choices. The cold reality of suspension hit Jova'a like a physical blow. As she surrendered her badge and gun, she felt as though she were handing over pieces of her very soul. The weight of that badge, once a source of pride and purpose, now left an aching void in its absence. In that moment, stripped of the symbols of her authority, Jova'a felt more naked and exposed than she ever had before. The isolation that followed was perhaps the cruelest punishment of all. Colleagues who had once shared laughs and confidences with her now averted their eyes in the hallways. The camaraderie that had sustained her through countless difficult shifts evaporated, replaced by a suffocating silence. Jova'a found herself adrift in a sea of judgment and suspicion, cut off from the only family she had known for years. As the days turned into weeks, an agonizing decision loomed before her. On one side lay her career, the path she had devoted her life to, the identity she had crafted with such care and dedication. On the other stood Terrell, the man who had awakened feelings in her she never knew existed. The choice seemed impossible, a Sophie's choice that threatened to tear her apart no matter which path she chose. In the end, love won out. With trembling hands and a heart heavy with conflicting emotions, Jova'a penned her resignation. As she signed her name, she felt the weight of her decision settle upon her shoulders like a heavy cloak. It was a weight she would carry for the rest of her life, a constant reminder of the sacrifice she had made in the name of love. The aftermath of her choice hit Jova'a with a force she hadn't anticipated. Without the structure and purpose her career had provided, she found herself adrift, her world narrowing to revolve almost entirely around Terrell. The sudden loss of direction left her reeling, grasping for something to anchor her in this new reality she had chosen. As the dust settled, Jova'a was left to confront the true depth of her sacrifice. She had given up not just a job, but an identity, a calling, a way of life. The woman who had once stood tall in her uniform, ready to protect and serve, now struggled to recognize herself in the mirror. The price of love, it seemed, was nothing less than everything she had ever known or been. Little did Jova'a know that this sacrifice was only the beginning. The path she had chosen would lead her down a road darker and more treacherous than she could have ever imagined, a journey that would test the very limits of her love, her courage, and her sanity. At first, the changes in Terrell's behavior were so subtle that Jova'a barely noticed them. A missed dinner here, a forgotten anniversary there. She chalked it up to the stress of their situation, the weight of their forbidden love. But as the days turned into weeks, the cracks in their paradise began to widen, impossible to ignore. Jova'a's instincts, honed by years in law enforcement, began to prickle with unease. The same gut feeling that had served her so well on the job now whispered dark suspicions about the man she had sacrificed everything for. Late-night phone calls that Terrell took in hushed tones, vague explanations about his whereabouts that didn't quite add up each incident added another layer of doubt to her growing unease. The moment the first whisper of infidelity reached her ears, Jova'a's world tilted on its axis. The rumor, passed to her by a former colleague who looked at her with a mixture of pity and judgment, hit her like a physical blow. She stumbled through the rest of that day in a daze, her mind reeling, unable to reconcile the Terrell she thought she knew with the man these rumors painted him to be. Despite the mounting evidence, Jova'a found herself clinging desperately to the relationship. She had given up everything for this love, her career, her reputation, her very identity. To admit that it might all have been for nothing was a truth too painful to bear. She made excuses, justified his behavior, anything to hold onto the dream they had built together. But the psychological toll of suspected betrayal was immense. Isolated from her former support system in law enforcement, Jova'a had no one to turn to, no shoulder to cry on. The very community that had once been her family now viewed her with suspicion and disdain. She was alone, adrift in a sea of doubt and fear, with only her increasingly unreliable partner as an anchor. As the days passed, a terrible realization began to dawn on Jova'a. The man she had given up everything for, the love she had believed would conquer all, might not be worthy of such monumental sacrifice. The thought hit her like a punch to the gut, leaving her breathless and reeling. How could she have been so blind? How could she have thrown away everything for someone who seemed to value her so little? The internal conflict that raged within Jova'a was all-consuming. Love and anger warred within her heart, each emotion threatening to tear her apart. The fear of admitting she had made a terrible mistake loomed large, a specter that haunted her every waking moment. To acknowledge the truth would mean facing the devastating reality that she had destroyed her life for a lie. In the quiet hours of the night, when sleep eluded her and doubts crept in like thieves, Jova'a found herself grappling with questions she had no answers to. How had she gone from a respected deputy to this, a woman consumed by suspicion and regret? The weight of her choices pressed down upon her, a crushing burden that threatened to suffocate her. Little did Jova'a know that this was only the beginning of her descent. The cracks in her trust were about to split wide open, revealing a chasm of betrayal that would push her to the very limits of her sanity. As she stood on the precipice of this terrible truth, the devastating impact of betrayal when one has already sacrificed everything for love was about to become all too clear. Just when Jova'a thought her world couldn't become more chaotic, a new life began growing within her, bringing with it a tempest of conflicting emotions. The ticking of her biological clock now synced with a countdown to an impossible decision. Would the promise of new life be her salvation, or would it push her past the point of no return? The moment those two pink lines appeared on the pregnancy test, Jova'a's world tilted on its axis once more. Joy and terror warred within her heart as she contemplated bringing a child into the tumultuous world she now inhabited. Her hand trembled as it rested on her still flat stomach, the weight of responsibility already pressing down upon her. As the days passed, the pressure of impending motherhood mounted, amplified by her unstable relationship with Terrell and the gaping void left by her lost career. Jova'a found herself caught in a maelstrom of emotions, desperately trying to create a semblance of normalcy and security for her unborn child, even as her own life spiraled further out of control. The physical toll of pregnancy was nothing compared to the emotional burden Jova'a now carried. Her body, once a finely tuned instrument of law enforcement, now felt foreign to her. Waves of nausea and fatigue crashed over her, heightened by the stress and uncertainty that clouded her future with Terrell. In quiet moments, she would catch herself wondering if the flutter in her stomach was the baby moving or just another bout of anxiety. As her belly swelled, so too did the conflicting emotions within Jova'a's heart. She found herself imagining a future where she raised this child with Terrell, but the image was tainted by doubt and fear. Would he be the father their child deserved, or would he perpetuate the cycle of betrayal and disappointment that had become all too familiar? The thought of her child growing up in a home filled with mistrust and suspicion was almost too much to bear. Isolation crept in like a thick fog as Jova'a's pregnancy progressed. Cut off from her former life and support system, she found herself relying solely on Terrell, a partner whose reliability was increasingly in question. The sound of her own voice echoing in empty rooms became a haunting reminder of how far she had fallen, how much she had lost in pursuit of a love that now seemed to be slipping through her fingers. With each passing week, anxiety mounted within Jova'a like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The approaching due date loomed on the horizon, a deadline that demanded decisions about her future and that of her unborn child. Questions swirled in her mind like a relentless storm. Could she trust Terrell to be there when she needed him most? Was she prepared to be a single mother if he wasn't? The weight of these unanswered questions pressed down upon her, threatening to crush her under their enormity. In her darkest moments, Jova'a found herself grappling with the cruel irony of her situation. She had sacrificed everything for love, only to find herself facing the prospect of motherhood alone. The child growing within her, once a beacon of hope, now felt like a ticking time bomb, adding a layer of complexity to an already volatile situation and raising the stakes to unimaginable heights. As Jova'a stood on the precipice of motherhood, her world teetering on the edge of chaos, she couldn't help but wonder if this new life would be her salvation or her final undoing. The clock continued its relentless march forward, each tick bringing her closer to a future she could neither predict nor control. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Jova'a's small apartment, she had no inkling of the storm that was about to break over her life. The air was thick with the scent of summer, carrying with it the promise of long, languid evenings. But for Jova'a, the next 48 hours would shatter any illusion of peace she had managed to cling to. The ping of her phone cut through the quiet like a knife. With trembling fingers, she opened the message, and in an instant, her world imploded. There, in stark high definition, was the proof she had both dreaded and secretly hoped for Terrell, locked in an intimate embrace with another woman. The betrayal was undeniable, captured in pixels that seared themselves into Jova'a's mind. A tidal wave of emotions crashed over her, threatening to pull her under. Rage bubbled up from the depths of her being, hot and corrosive, eating away at every happy memory she had shared with Terrell. Betrayal wrapped its icy fingers around her heart, squeezing until she could barely breathe. And beneath it all, a bottomless well of despair opened up, threatening to swallow her whole. With shaking hands, Jova'a dialed Terrell's number again and again. Each unanswered ring was like a nail in the coffin of their relationship. Her messages grew increasingly frantic, a digital trail of her unraveling composure. "Call me, we need to talk. How could you do this to us?" The silence on the other end was deafening, fueling the inferno of her desperation. As night fell, sleep eluded Jova'a. She paced the confines of her apartment like a caged animal, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. Revenge fantasies played out in vivid detail, only to be replaced by moments of crushing self-doubt. Had she driven him to this? Was this punishment for turning her back on her career, her principles? The child growing within her kicked, a stark reminder of the stakes at play. With the first light of dawn, a dangerous resolve crystallized within Jova'a. She would confront Terrell face to face, force him to look her in the eye, and explain his betrayal. The decision settled over her like a shroud, heavy with the weight of its consequences. Yet in that moment, it felt like the only path forward. Jova'a slid behind the wheel of her car, her entire body thrumming with nervous energy. Each mile that passed beneath her tires brought her closer to a confrontation that would alter the course of her life forever. The familiar streets of her community blurred past, transformed into an alien landscape by the turmoil in her heart. As she drove, the full weight of her situation pressed down upon her. She was no longer Deputy Jackson, respected law enforcement officer. That woman had died the day she chose Terrell over her career. Now, she was just Jova'a, pregnant, betrayed, and teetering on the edge of an abyss she couldn't begin to fathom. The psychological breaking point, when betrayal, pregnancy, and lost identity collide, is a precarious ledge. For Jova'a, standing on that ledge, the world below seemed to spin out of control. The once respected deputy, who had sworn to protect and serve, now found herself driven by primal emotions she had never known existed within her. Little did Jova'a know, as she sped towards her confrontation with Terrell, that the next few hours would push her beyond any limit she had ever known. The path she was on would lead to a moment of no return, a split-second decision that would echo through the rest of her life. The ticking clock of her pregnancy, the shattering of her trust, and the loss of her very identity were about to converge in a perfect storm of desperation. The car's tires screeched to a halt, and with it, time itself seemed to freeze. Jova'a stepped out, her hand instinctively brushing against her service weapon. In the next few minutes, a series of choices would be made that would irrevocably alter the course of multiple lives. What transpired in those crucial moments between Jova'a and Terrell? The air crackled with tension as Jova'a approached the apartment complex. Her heart pounded in her chest, a deafening rhythm that threatened to drown out all rational thought. The weight of her emotions, a toxic mixture of love, betrayal, and desperation, pressed down upon her with each step. As she reached the door, her fingers trembled, hovering for a moment before she summoned the courage to knock. The sound of the door opening was like a gunshot in the quiet night. Terrell stood before her, his face a mask of surprise and apprehension. For a moment they stood frozen, the air between them thick with unspoken accusations and shattered trust. Then, like a dam bursting, the floodgates of their emotions broke open. Years of love, sacrifice, and betrayal boiled over in a matter of moments. Accusations flew like daggers, each word cutting deeper than the last. Jova'a's voice, raw with pain, rose above the din of their argument. "How could you do this to us?" she cried, her hand instinctively moving to her swollen belly. Terrell's denials only stoked the fires of her rage, his excuses ringing hollow in the face of her anguish. As the argument escalated, a dangerous dance began. Terrell stepped forward, his hands raised in a placating gesture that did little to calm Jova'a's frayed nerves. She retreated, her back pressing against the wall, feeling trapped both physically and emotionally. The world narrowed to this moment, this confrontation that had been building for months. In a split second that felt like an eternity, Jova'a's hand moved to her weapon. The cool metal against her palm triggered a flood of memories, her training, her oath to protect and serve. But in that moment, those noble ideals clashed violently with the maelstrom of emotions raging within her. Her finger tightened on the trigger, muscles tensed in anticipation. The sound of the gunshot shattered the night like a thunderclap. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then, as if in slow motion, Terrell stumbled backward, a look of shock etched across his features. Jova'a watched, frozen in horror, as he crumpled to the ground, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Reality came crashing down with brutal force. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Jova'a's legs gave way beneath her, and she sank to the floor, her mind reeling as the full weight of her actions began to sink in. What had she done? The wail of sirens pierced the night, growing louder with each passing second. Jova'a remained motionless, her eyes fixed on Terrell's still form. As the first officers burst onto the scene, the cruel irony of the situation hit her like a physical blow. These were her former colleagues, men and women she had once called family. Now, they looked at her with a mixture of shock and suspicion, their hands hovering near their own weapons. As she was led away in handcuffs, Jova'a felt the last threads of her old identity unravel. No longer was she Deputy Jackson, respected law enforcement officer. In one tragic moment, she had become something else entirely, a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how quickly a protector could become a perpetrator. The night air was heavy with the weight of what had transpired. A relationship built on shaky foundations had come crashing down, leaving behind a trail of destruction that would ripple outward for years to come. In the end, love, betrayal, and desperation had led to an irreversible act, forever changing the lives of all involved. As the patrol car pulled away, Jova'a closed her eyes, the gravity of her actions settling over her like a shroud. There was no going back now. As the sirens faded into the distance, Jova'a's world narrowed to the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station. The flashing blue and red that once signaled her arrival now marked her downfall. She stood, a ghost of her former self, as colleagues turned captors led her through a process she had performed countless times before. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into her wrists, a stark reminder of the irreversible line she had crossed. The booking procedure unfolded like a surreal nightmare. Each step, once a familiar routine, now felt like a nail in the coffin of her former life. Fingerprints, mug shots, the rustling of the orange jumpsuit every moment etched itself into her memory with cruel clarity. The weight of her actions pressed down upon her, threatening to crush what little remained of the woman she once was. Beyond the station walls, shock waves rippled through the community. The news of a former deputy's fall from grace spread like wildfire, eroding what little trust remained in law enforcement. Neighbors who once waved warmly now huddled in groups, whispering behind cupped hands. The thin blue line, already stretched to its limits, frayed further under the weight of betrayal. In the stark light of the courtroom, Jova'a's story unfolded in all its tragic complexity. Prosecutors painted a picture of premeditation, of a woman consumed by jealousy and rage. Her swollen belly, once a symbol of hope, now served as a silent witness to the gravity of her actions. Meanwhile, her defense team scrambled to portray a woman pushed to the brink, her judgment clouded by hormones and heartbreak. The media descended like vultures, their cameras and microphones hungry for every scrap of the salacious story. Jova'a's face was splashed across news outlets, her past dissected and debated by strangers who knew nothing of her struggles. armchair psychologists and internet sleuths picked apart every detail of her life, searching for the moment when protector became perpetrator. As day bled into night, Jova'a found herself alone in a cold cell, the concrete walls closing in around her. The long hours stretched before her, filled with nothing but the echoes of her thoughts and the weight of her regrets. She grappled with the consequences of her actions, her mind replaying those fateful moments in an endless loop. The future, once brimming with promise, now loomed dark and uncertain. In the quiet moments between guard checks, Jova'a's thoughts turned to the innocent life growing within her. Her hand rested on her swollen belly, a bittersweet reminder of dreams now shattered. This child, conceived in love and hope, would enter a world shaped by the decisions made in those tragic moments. The weight of that realization pressed down upon her, heavier than any prison sentence. As the days blurred together, the far-reaching consequences of Jova'a's actions became painfully clear. A single act of violence had transformed her from a respected deputy into a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of how quickly one's life can unravel. The woman who once stood as a symbol of justice now found herself on the other side of the law, her future as uncertain as the fate of the child she carried. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's gavel struck, sealing Jova'a Jackson's fate. The verdict echoed through the room, a final, damning punctuation to a story that had begun with such promise. As Jova'a was led away, the weight of her choices etched deep lines in her once proud face. The woman who had sworn to protect and serve now shuffled forward in shackles, a stark reminder of how quickly a life can unravel. In the hushed aftermath, spectators grappled with the fine line between justice and vengeance, love and obsession. Jova'a's journey from decorated deputy to convicted murderer served as a chilling cautionary tale. Her story, a twisted tapestry of passion and betrayal, would linger in the collective memory of the community for years to come. As the courtroom doors closed behind her, Jova'a's fate became a stark reminder of the power our choices hold. In the blink of an eye, a life dedicated to upholding the law had crumbled, leaving behind only shattered dreams and unanswered questions. The blurring of personal and professional lines had led her down a path of no return, a descent that would forever change the lives of all involved.